Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Pittsfield, where here in Pike County they're very proud of the connections to Abraham Lincoln. He had great friends here. In fact, some of his closest professional acquaintances, his greatest aides through his presidency, lived here in Pittsfield for a time. In fact, they're going to reenact one of the weddings of one of these men, John Nicolay, later on in June. But first, when you come to Pittsfield to learn about Lincoln and his associates, you'll find that there's some new additions here. The Looking for Lincoln sign is here, of course. But they've also, at the courthouse on the grounds here, they've inducted some of these folks here with their own statues. These are the folks that were so important to Lincoln and, of course, to U.S. history. And Bob Evans has been sort of charting this history throughout his life. Bob, you and a large group of people have been saying to yourselves, we have this enormous Lincoln connection, and we've never really let the world know about it. And that's what this celebration in June is all about, isn't it?
Exactly. Mr. Lincoln came to Pike County first time in 1839 and last time in 1858. Out of his 5 secretaries, 3 of them were from Pike County. John Nicolay and John Hay both spent time in Pittsfield, and Mr. Lincoln came to the new courthouse that was built here in 1839 and made numerous trips to Pike County during that 19 years and made lots of friends here. He had multiple friends in Pike County and Pittsfield in particular. He spent time at the Manson House, which is just across the street from the courthouse, telling stories. He was a storyteller, as you well know, and a lot of the local fellas would congregate there and listen to his stories. There's so many different incidents of him telling stories, and in fact one time getting himself in a pickle because a lady down the street had planned lunch for them all, had a big turkey dinner, and he was telling stories and they ran late. The turkey got cold and she kind of chastised him. So Mrs. Scanlon put him in his place.
Well, he had to pay for those stories with cold turkey.
Yes.
Listen, these statues, particularly this one now with Abraham Lincoln behind you, these have not been here this long, have they?
No. They've been here about a year now, and they are from an anonymous donor. Put the money up to do these, and a lady from Ontario, Canada did the bronze work, and she's going to be here on the 15th to dedicate these to Pike County's history. So we have Nicolay, Hay, and Lincoln. We do not have a picture of Charles Philbrick. He was the 3rd secretary from Pike County. He lived in Griggsville. He served with Lincoln about 8 months before Lincoln was assassinated. But we can't find a picture of him. He went to Illinois College for 5 years. They don't have a picture of him.
It's remarkable that they've always got a picture of him.
Yes, there's no pictures even in the archives in Washington, D.C. No pictures of Charles Philbrick.
Well, for this purposes, let's concentrate on Nicolay and Hay, because we do know a lot about them. In fact, let's back up here and take a look at this sculpture here of John Nicolay first. He was secretary to Lincoln for all 5 years.
He was the first secretary chosen by Lincoln. He had become acquainted with Mr. Lincoln earlier, and Lincoln knew his qualities, and at the time Mr. Lincoln was elected, John Nicolay was working for O.M. Hatch in Springfield, who was Secretary of State at that point in time, and Mr. Hatch suggested to Lincoln that he take Nicolay as a secretary because he was very good at his work. So from that point, he was with Lincoln, was on the train when they went to Washington, D.C., lived in the White House from 1861 to 1865, and they were very close friends, confidants. Nicolay was not such a close friend with Mrs. Lincoln. She was not his favorite person, nor was he hers. But he had lots of influence and a lot of input into Lincoln's life and career. And the last 10 years of his life, he spent working on a complete 10-volume series of Lincoln's life and career. They have all 10 at our library. But Nicolay also wrote books. But he came back here to Pittsfield June 15th, 1865. After Lincoln had been assassinated in April, he came back and married his longtime sweetheart, Tarina Bates. They had met when he first came to Pittsfield as about a 14-year-old boy and remained sweethearts until the time they got married. And
he married older too, didn't he? He married a little older.
He was in his late 20s, we believe, when he.
Back then, that was pretty old to get married, wasn't it?
Yes, but he'd been a very busy person. When he worked with Lincoln, he wrote letters to Tarina saying how many times in the night Lincoln would come down and knock on their door. He and Hay wake them up and want to talk about something, want to use them for a sounding board. And he had, he described to her lines of people each day waiting to see the president with either some problem or a request or something, and he had to deal with those people.
We mentioned just a little bit ago about his getting married here in Pittsfield. And your group, actually part of what this whole weekend in June is about, part of it is the reenactment of John Nicolay's wedding, which did take place here on this grounds in Pike County.
In Pike County, yes. They were married at her parents' house, which sat near where our post office is. You can see it from here.
Okay, it was near the square, but it wasn't on the courthouse ground. Okay,
exactly. And they were married there and then had their reception at Mrs. Garbutt's house, which was out on East Washington, where Nicolay had lived as more or less a foster child with the Garbutts.
Okay. And we can visit that house, right?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do that later in the program. Let's go talk about Hay a little bit. He's right on the other side here. John Hay is a name that many historians are familiar with. He was Secretary of State. He was also the secretary to Lincoln when he was president for all 5 years, I think, wasn't he?
Yes. He actually was born in Indiana, and his parents moved to Warsaw, which was then called Spunky Point or Fort Edwards.
Fort Edwards, that's right.
And then when he was about 12 years old, his parents sent him here to live with his uncle Milton Hay, who lived just a couple of blocks from us here. And he went to the school of the Thompson Academy. He and Nicolay both were students there. But his parents, Hay's parents, sent him here specifically to go to that school for the education that they offered.
How did he meet Lincoln?
I think through Nicolay and through O.M. Hatch. O.M. Hatch was a Griggsville man. He was originated in Griggsville. And his family, in fact, are still family members that live in that area. And O.M. Hatch was Secretary of State during the time Lincoln was president, and he was familiar with these young fellows and their abilities, and he was a very close friend of Lincoln's, so he suggested that Lincoln use these guys, and he did. And I think they served him very well.
It certainly appears to. While we're standing here and we're on the courthouse grounds, as we look over there to that would be the south-facing steps, I guess.
Yes.
In June, later on in the weekend in June, you're going to have this reenactment of the wedding on on those steps.
That's right.
And you're going to have local folks playing the roles of Nicolay and Hay and Mrs. Nicolay and everybody, and you're going to have music, and you're going to have period music, and you're going to have a whole weekend of festivities, aren't you?
Period games for the kids. Then on Saturday there will be tours of the courthouse, tours of our museums. We'll have 3 genealogy depots. We'll have gingerbread and cider at some of the local restaurants. Because in 1858, when Lincoln was here his last time, he and Nicolay had gingerbread and cider at the Heck Bakery. So this whole weekend is pretty much revolving around the Nicolay, Hay, and Lincoln connections and the marriage. John Hay, when Lincoln was assassinated, Hay was sitting on the end of the bed when Lincoln took his last breath.
Oh, I didn't know he was present at his death.
Yes,
really?
Yes.
Well, they were close.
Sitting on the end of the bed. John Nicolay was out of the country. He was on a mission and was on a ship when he got the news that Lincoln had been assassinated. So he wasn't there at the time, but of course came along later.
Yeah.
But just 2 months after Lincoln was assassinated, he came back here and married Serena, who had been his sweetheart for 19 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they wed here, and 4 days later were getting on a ship to go to Paris, where he was to serve as an ambassador to Paris.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of a hurried up deal. But he had written her a letter and told her that, well, I'm not sure I'm going to get to take you with me to Paris. And she wrote him back and said, well, if you don't, this is over. You know, 19
Okay.
years is enough.
All right.
And her father had kind of softened up. He was a very strong Democrat, and he was not in favor of her marrying this Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And he finally softened up a little bit, and they were married in the Bates house.
Mm-hmm.
So it all worked out okay as far as that's concerned. They had one daughter, Helen Nicolay. She never married, but she did write a book about her father. John Hay, I think, had 4 children. He married Clara Stone, who was a very, very rich lady. Her father, Amasa Stone, was the head of the rail company out in Baltimore, Maryland, and they said he walked into like $3 million as a dowry when he was married.
Wow.
So back in that day,
Oh,
you
my
know,
goodness,
it was
yeah.
lots of money. But both of those fellows did significant things. They both wrote books. John Hay wrote numerous books. In 1871, he came out with the Pike County Ballads, it was called. It was 6 short stories of river life activity done in the old river dialect, the old slang dialect. You ain't there, are you?
So he remembered that from being a kid growing up in Warsaw?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Did he have any a connection to Mark Twain?
Well, Samuel Clemens and Hay were very good friends.
Really?
And in 1871, Hay came out with the Pike County Ballads, and in 1876, Mark Twain was penning the Tom Sawyer saga.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think there was a pretty close
They may have
connection.
critiqued each other's books, huh? Yeah.
But this Pike County Ballads came out in 71. John Hay was embarrassed by it because he had been through Brown University and he'd been with the socialites in Washington for these 4 years, and he was embarrassed that, you know, he wanted his social friends to know he even knew that kind of language.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of embarrassing, but it became very popular, and he finally softened up. It was originally a little hardback book that had 40 poems and 6 ballads. I know where there's 2 copies of that original 1871, but we had just the ballads part of it reprinted, and those 6 ballads are in that.
Now, during this program, we get a chance we're going to view 3 locations. One where the old Free Press was,
Okay.
and the house where
Nicolay
lived, and the house where
John Hay
lived.
Okay.
And you can tell us a little more about their childhood, how they happened to be here, how they happened to excel into their professional lives. So let's walk that way. Okay. Well, Bob, it's not there anymore, but if we look at this building right on the square here, this was where the Free Press stood.
Exactly.
It was the newspaper where both Nicolay and Hay worked for a time, wasn't it?
Yes. Nicolay worked there from the time he came to Pittsfield until he left Pittsfield when he was age 25, and Hay was there with him working for a couple of years while he was here going to school.
Yeah.
But they became friends and learned a lot about journalism, politics, and literature from the Free Press News.
There are a couple of stories too that at least one of them would have possibly met Lincoln coming in and out of the newspaper at some point.
The story from Tom Shasted is that his grandfather had met Mr. Lincoln in the street somewhere near where we are now, and they shook hands, and Mr. Lincoln said, "I need some print work done." And Mr. Shasted said, "Come go with me," and he took him across and introduced him to Nicolay.
Okay, and there we meet Nicolay. Okay, well, let's go to some of these houses in Pittsfield where we know that these gentlemen spent part of their young life. Okay. Well, if you're venturing and looking for the history of Nicolay in Pittsfield, this is a place you'd come, in the Garbett House, right?
Yes. The Garbett House was owned by Zachariah and Pamela Garbett. He owned the Free Press News Office, and he also was a minister. But he put Nicolay to work as a young man, about 14 years old, as a printer's devil in the newspaper office. And then Mr. Garbett passed away in 1854. Nicolay and another fellow bought the newspaper from Mrs. Garbett. They continued to run it in a partnership. Then Nicolay bought the other fellow out and owned it on his own for 2 years.
Now, Nicolay was an immigrant. He was brought here with his family and loud farm equipment. And then his parents died, and he came to Pittsfield as an orphan, right?
Well, his mother passed away soon after they came from Bavaria. His mother passed away, and he was about 6 years old at that point. His father settled in Bee Creek down below Pearl, had a flour mill. He passed away in 1846. And then, during that time period, is when Nicolay came to Pittsfield.
I see. And the Garbetts took him in as sort of a foster
Yes.
child. And it was what a wonderful chain of events, because he owned the newspaper, he went to work for the newspaper, met Abraham Lincoln, found his gifts, and away he went, right?
Exactly, yes. And he, during the time he owned the newspaper, in 1858, wrote an article about Lincoln. Lincoln was becoming pretty popular.
Yeah.
He wrote an article about him that went out in the local papers, and it was so powerful about Lincoln's qualities that in 1860, a bunch of the local guys had 1,000 copies printed, took it to the Wigwam in Chicago, passed it around among the delegates, and it's believed that that's what swayed the vote from William Seward to Abe Lincoln for president.
darn.
All started here.
Fantastic. Well, Jared Dodd, did you get roped into playing the role of John Hay, or was it easy to get you to accept that?
It was pretty easy for me to accept it, get me to accept it. I've been volunteering at the All Wars Museum, and I've been kind of talking with Bob here and there, and he asked, so I'm not doing anything better, so I figured, why not?
John Hay, Secretary to President Lincoln, and you will be the best man at Nicolay's wedding, right?
Correct.
Okay. Have you ever been a best man?
I've
you have
never
any
been.
practice at this?
No,
practice
no
at
practice.
this. Well, I guarantee you it wouldn't be the same anyway, because I think weddings are probably different back then. But it's an honor, I think, isn't it, to be involved in it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you probably not. We just looked at this sculpture of John Hay, and I'm not sure that anybody really sees much of a resemblance. But if we look at this photograph of him as a younger man, I can see a resemblance between you, Jared, and John Hay as a man in his late 20s. I can kind of see a resemblance. Now, have you been doing your research?
I've started. I have a lot of books that I've been
okay, so you're from
through.
Pittsfield, right?
Correct.
Okay, so did you even know going into this that John Hay spent a good amount of his time here as a young man?
I knew about him. I didn't know a whole lot. I just knew that he was Secretary of Lincoln. I didn't know that he went to school here or what his role in Pike County really was until I started looking into it. And it's a pretty fascinating life he lived.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. And what did you learn about him recently that you didn't know about him before?
Well, that he wasn't originally from here. He was from Salem, Indiana. Then he moved to Warsaw and lived there until about 12, and then came here to go to school at Academy here, and that's where he met John Nicolay at the Free Press, and started working at the newspaper here together, and that's kind of where their friendship bonded and became. He didn't live long here, but I think he definitely had an impact on his life living here, and his early childhood living on the banks of the Mississippi was kind of, I don't know, Mark Twain-esque, just river life, and it's just fascinating character.
Now, when you play this role of John Hay, do you have to memorize any lines or anything, or are you just going to show up?
As far as I know now, just show up.
Do you have period clothing?
They're being made.
They're being made for you.
Yep.
Huh? So you've been measured?
Got
and
measured.
It's going to be measured. Okay.
Yep.
Are your measurements? Do you know if they're close to John Hay's measurements? Was he built like you?
He was built kind of like me. He was kind of wiry, athletic type person. So as far as I know, we're pretty close.
Well, listen, I just hope you have a good time. And you know, one thing I've also known about theater and about doing reenactments and stuff, it's a great opportunity to learn stuff that you would have never looked into before.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, Christine, period music for the wedding dating back to what, the mid 1800s or even earlier maybe?
Even earlier on the English country dance tunes. Probably were 17th century. In any case, definitely prior to 1865.
Mm-hmm. And there will be six of, they're all ladies, right, that's in the
Yes.
group, and they all play recorders. Would you hold that up for us? Because a lot of people don't know what a recorder is. Six of these.
Six recorders. There will be a soprano recorder, an alto recorder. This is a tenor recorder. And a contrabass recorder. There will be two tenor players and two alto players. So.
And you're the Pike Pipers.
We are the Pike Pipers.
Clever name.
Well, one of our groupies came up with that name, who happened to be the father and also the husband of one of the father of one of the members and the husband of one of the members, I believe, were responsible for coming up with that clever name.
What was the name of that piece that we just heard?
We just heard the Merry Milkmaids in Green.
And what do we know about that piece?
We know that it's an English country dance tune that was collected by an Englishman by the name of John Playford, probably in the 17th century. And we don't know why it's called the Merry Milkmaids in Green. It seems like it
sounds like a merry tune to me.
It's a merry tune. It was a dance tune. So that's what we know about it.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and it's going to sound great with six pieces.
Yes, with multiple players, it's a much fuller sound, and you'll have all of the parts. We played two out of three, but most of the music will be at least four part.
Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.
Well, I think we're on, what are we on, Main Street? We're on the highway going
West Washington.
West Washington, okay. And this is the house called, it's Watson House?
Well,
the Watson House?
Yes, the Watson House, but it's where John Hay's uncle Milton Hay lived when he was an attorney here in Pittsfield. And when John Hay came to Pittsfield in 1851, he lived here with his uncle Milton and went to the Thompson Academy, which was just about 2 blocks south of us. There's no building there anymore, just a house.
Yeah, it was kind of like homeschooling, wasn't it? It was just this.
It was a mom-pop school, but the lady taught 4 languages, and the man taught 4 languages, and they taught higher mathematics and music, which were, you couldn't get
kids
that
at that time. They didn't have access to that.
So his parents sent him here to go to the Thompson Academy. And all through their careers, Nicolay and Hay both referred to the Thompson Academy as their foundation for their love of literature and journalism and their learning. They taught, they spoke different languages because of that, and they just got a good foundation. Right there.
And so this is his uncle's house, Hay's uncle's house. Now, what did he lose his parents too? Hay lose his parents?
No, Hay's parents stayed in Warsaw as far as we know, and probably in later years he did visit them numerous times, but as far as his connections to Pittsfield, that was it, other than coming back here to visit people. I know he went to Dr. Worthington's house out where the hospital is. He went there to social events and different places, but as far as the actual living here, he did not come back here to live.
Well, I know you are all, Bob, all looking forward to this event on June 15th and 16th. And for those of you who are interested in history or just want to go back about a century or so, on the 15th and 16th, Mr. Nicolay's wedding will be reenacted on the courthouse grounds, and there will be all kinds of period activities for children and adults as well. With another Illinois story in Pittsfield, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you. For a DVD copy of the program you've just seen, send 1995 to P.O. Box 6248, Springfield, Illinois 62708. Be sure to include the program name, subject, and when the program aired. You can also order with your credit card by calling 800-232-3605.